Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rodcast. Today, my guest is an expert in HMO sales, having started and built a national HMO-specific sales agency. However, there have been some hard lessons learned from previous property businesses, and we're going to have a really candid talk today about the good, bad, and ugly of what happens when property-related businesses can go wrong.
Welcome to the Rodcast with Rod Turner, the show all about real estate. We discuss everything that affects asset-backed businesses, investments, and go deep into the details with some of the best in the business.
So, Richard Nicholls, welcome to the Rodcast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Very good, thanks. So, Richard, look, I know you as having fantastic knowledge in terms of HMOs and the sales market, running an HMO-specific sales agency. But you've had other property-related businesses in the past which have had mixed results, let's say. And there's been some really hard lessons that have had to be learnt from both sides. I wanted to have a discussion with you today about some of those, including what has gone wrong, why it went wrong, what you learned, and how you've been able to take those learnings to ensure that your current business thrives. And I just want to make it clear that this isn't in any way here to kind of glorify mistakes, because as listeners will hear, there are casualties on both sides. So it's really about what we can learn from what happened. So with that in mind, would you be able to give us some background as to how you got into the property industry?
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm looking to do in terms of every success that I talk about from now on going into the future. I'm combining that with discussing openly about the things that went wrong, because I think it's quite important, really. So my entry to property 20 plus years ago, estate agent, went into a estate agency, pretty much pricked up the knack pretty quickly. So started valuing and appraising properties, branch manager, I'd say probably within a year of going in. So I was probably managing people and being responsible for valuations and listing property probably as 18 plus years ago. And enjoyed a fairly successful time working for independents and corporates. I had my own small little estate agency, so this was probably through my mid to late 20s. Kind of worked with a lot of builders, a lot of developers, a lot of investors, did a couple of flips, and thought, like most entrepreneurs, I could take over the world. And then we arrived. So fast forward to 2015, 2016, and I arrived in London with the ambitions to take over the world. And unfortunately, I chose the wrong industry, the wrong time of life, and the wrong personal circumstances. It kind of went into residential extensions by mistake, if you like, because I came to London with my partner at the time. I came to London to work as an estate agent. I'd been offered a profit share of a new branch, so I came down. It didn't quite work out with my partner at the time, so I was unable to work in an employed role. I knew a builder at the time. I'd done a couple of deals with him, a couple of bits of work, and came up with the idea that I'm a lead generator. I'm an estate agent. I know how to value. I know how to appraise. I know how to present. So how about I create a website? I create a bit of a brand. I find the building work, and this guy does the building work and executes the essentially what extensions and renovations. So technically, I was doing what I was experienced in, which was generating leads and speaking to clients and working on that basis. We did one property which went fine, and then all of a sudden, that particular builder had to go back to. He lived in Romania. Had to go back to Romania. His wife was pregnant, and I think the maternity care over there was a little bit better for them. So he left. But by this point, me being me, I had several building projects booked in. So, and analysing the mistakes, which we can talk about, the mistakes that I made, which we can try and mitigate for people listening, I just essentially carried on, put those jobs, advertised them on Rated People. And I think Checker Trade, we were saying the other day, booked in a load of builders and just went full steam ahead into a load of renovations.
So you didn't have time and didn't kind of go through the due diligence process on those builders, whether they were appropriate and things like that. Yeah.
It was my biggest mistake, really. And the hardest lesson that I learned from the construction, I think London, I was totally ill prepared for London in terms of how cutthroat it was in the building industry. The projects that I'd done, so for example, the first flip that I did, we went all together with the build team and we went up to Middlesbrough Monday to Friday from Chester, and we did a flip, and then we drove down on Friday, and I lived amongst the plasterer, the plumber, the bricklayer, and these kind of builders were, they were known in Chester, and we all drank in the same pub, and it was all. So my experience of working with tradespeople were, I went to school with Dave. I knew this person, that person, and I just didn't understand the level of due diligence, and I didn't understand what makes builders operate, and I just
what their motivations are and what they are.
Yeah, and I had no comprehension that there is this underbelly of builders who are constantly doing a bad job, and they're constantly just prospecting for new work on Rated People and these kind of websites, making themselves available. And we said the other day, the biggest lesson that I learned in hindsight was that, and I was that builder as well. If a builder can start tomorrow, he's a bad builder. And unfortunately for me, naivety, inexperience, burying my head in the sand, thinking I just resorted to type as a salesperson and just put my foot down on the pedal. Next thing, 10, 11, 12 building projects have gone wrong. I've got myself in a 250, 300, 400 grand hole with these projects, and trying to step off that mess, when I've just had 18 months of papering over the cracks, booking more jobs in, the cash flow was all over the place. Totally naive, totally irresponsible from my side. I'd like to think if I was in the headspace that I was in prior or after, first job goes wrong, you think, whoa, hang on a minute, let's go back to being an estate agent.
Yeah, let's prove the concept works before we start scaling this up again and fix the problems.
I think there's a lot of people like me out there who are used to quick growth, used to accelerating with things. They're, very...
So it's managing your own expectations as well. It's a bit of a
and not being aware of the mistakes I was making along the way.
And so, from your client's point of view, because obviously you were in the hole for money, but from your customer's point of view, how did that affect them?
Massively. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about homeowners. We're not talking about investors. This is people's homes. The biggest lesson that I learned after I got off this, my mitigating circumstances in all of this, we'll talk about the investigation and the sentencing, but the mitigating circumstances were I was in the middle of a quite bad custody battle. So I was going through quite a bit of personal trauma at the time, and I've done a lot of analysing since 2018 when it kind of ended, or late 2017 when it ended. And when you're going through sort of maybe trauma or a very stressful situation, as we were saying the other day, that you end up apathetic to other people's emotions. You don't pick up on other people's emotions and the trouble that you're causing them. And I've done a lot of soul searching around that since 2018 and understanding how did I let these jobs go wrong, and how didn't I pick up on the damage that I was causing. I was more focused on maybe selfishly, maybe sort of I was just tunneling down on my own custody battle and my own personal problems. And I was...
Which I guess is fine until you start affecting other people's lives, isn't it?
And the average person, and me prior and after this period, you just wouldn't carry on. You'd be so distraught of the damage that you're creating. But it sounds ridiculous, but I genuinely didn't realise the extent of what was happening. I think because, first of all, I wasn't responsible for budgets. I wasn't responsible for project managing. I didn't really understand how bad these builders were doing the work. A lot of them, so I didn't have the full context till a couple of years later of actually the amount of problem I was causing.
And so it was a kind of around, you were very much the sales and growth guy, and you kind of, I don't know, not to sound harsh, but forgot about the operational part of the business and also the finance side of it as well, which is kind of cash flow keeps a business alive and all that kind of stuff.
And mine was all over the place because the hard reality of it is, I mean, I had my car tyres slashed, I had builders turn up to the house. You try and be firm and say, look, you're not getting that stage payment because the client's not happy. But that builder turns up to your house at 5 p.m. demanding money, and you've got yourself in a bit of a problem. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And
that I guess is about kind of the contract with the builder or subbies from day one.
Yeah.
Making sure it goes for any partnership in anything. Is making sure that everyone knows where they stand in the event of X or Y happening, doesn't it? And, and it's easy to say with hindsight. I know that, but no one knows this until it goes wrong.
I think my naivety at the beginning, taking all builders on trust and on face value. So first couple of jobs, you can pass it off as naivety, but then after the first couple of jobs, it then clicks into desperation. So I'm having to find builders that can start tomorrow because I've just sacked another team from a job halfway through a project. And
like you say, if you're having to find them tomorrow, there's not many good builders available tomorrow, and then you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul almost.
Exactly.
And
and that was exactly it. And my own personality traits exasperated that because I couldn't go in the evening and repair some joinery. I couldn't go and knew very little about detailed project management.
Yeah, you're not a capable build person. You're a capable salesperson.
Exactly. And and a perfect storm of problems just meant that over an 18-month period, I caused a lot of damage to a lot of clients, and be paying the price for the rest of my life essentially. Yeah.
And so what happened? What was the outcome?
So the outcome, I was called in. There was one subcontractor. So across the jobs that went wrong, there was at least probably 15 or 20 different build teams. So it wasn't just one team going across each job, making the same mistakes. So there was loads of people coming and going, trialing different things, and there was one contractor that spotted that there was more than one project going wrong, and he spoke to a couple of clients, and I found out in about late 2017 that they wanted to go to trading standards. So I preempted it and contacted trading standards myself, got in touch with them and said, look, I've messed up here. I am going to have to give up this. I'm chasing my tail. I've been doing it for a year now. I've caused there's a lot of projects that haven't been finished. Not all of them were, complete wrecks and shells. Some of them got as far as tiling. Some just didn't have a set of bifold doors paid for, but there was a collection of jobs, and there was a pattern being created. And I went to trading standards and essentially emailed them, had a phone call with the lady who had taken over this case. This was probably maybe early 2018, something like that. Volunteered myself and all the information to them, and didn't hear anything for another couple of years, to be honest. So I essentially said to the individual clients, look, I'm going to go back to what I'm good at. In 2018, the big thing for me, I was awarded shared custody. So my son, the trauma of those previous 2 years, I justified it with myself to think, well, I completely cocked up professionally. I broke myself across that period of time, and I'd ruined all these, people's properties and projects. But at the end of it, at least I got shared custody.
But in turn, you might have caused other people the same trauma that you got from that.
Exactly. And you live with that. You live with that all the time. So I came back into I left London in 2018 and thought, right, well, I'm going to get back to what I'm good at, which is the business that you've seen me with. A lot of people will be familiar with. And I had an ambition to, essentially save up, work my arse off and compensate and do the right thing. Every client knew where I was. I was obviously very public. I was open. I was available to speak to people. And I did have early communication with the clients in terms of letting them know how I was getting on, how I was going to be finding their compensation. And then it could have been 2019. It could have been 2020, can't quite remember, but I was called in for a trading standards interview. So I went down to London. It was in Southwark Trading Standards. And they hit me with, I sat down in this room and they had boxes of paperwork. I came out, and with the lady that interviewed me, I burst out crying in the lobby area. It was so traumatic. And the biggest trauma for me was hearing it in the context of being past my personal problems and them reading the client statements and hearing firsthand the extent of the damage that was caused, because I wouldn't have caused that damage if I was in the right headspace. So I had no idea. And at the time, so 2 years hence all the problems, the one that stuck out in my mind, which just ended up being the biggest casualty, if you like, the biggest loss, there was a builder that built an extension in the wrong place, which I just didn't know about. So I left the job thinking, okay, it's maybe a 20 grand, 10 grand problem. Turned into a 100 grand problem, this property, because the particular builder that I'd chosen, I can't remember if it was the foundations were too shallow or the extension was in the wrong place. I had no idea, and to hear that on an interview, I'm not sure if it was under caution or whatever it was, but yeah, that was quite a sobering moment, really. So I ran with that alongside building myself back and, working in the property advantage, building the business that I was good at and getting back to, a business that I can scale because it's my industry.
And you've got capabilities and you're good at it. Whereas with that, it's clearly that the operational side was not your forte.
Yeah. And just dealing with builders and dealing with people. And I think, the advice to anybody, I should have just been an employee during that time, fighting a custody battle. I just lost my dad suddenly to a heart attack. I just moved to London and I was just vulnerable from all these external forces. And I should have just spotted and thought, right, this is not the time to be an entrepreneur. This is the time to just take a job, take a wage and get through my personal problems.
And I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because and this is in no way meant to sound kind of mean or anything, but that's life. Life is going through ups and downs, and like we say, people die. Like if no one listening to this has had something traumatic happen in their life, they haven't had it yet, because unfortunately it will happen. And it's about how we kind of not just deal with it, but how we understand what we're going through at the time, and making sure what we're doing is kind of is allocated. It's great that you understand that.
Managing
kind of
workload.
Yeah.
Myself now, fast forward, and we'll fill in the gaps, but fast forward to now, I'm obviously rebuilding and I'm scheduling work. So I've come back out. I've got a lot of clients that want to work with me and I'm slowing my workload down. I'm making it manageable. I'm keeping on top of my kind of personal life, my emotions, my finances, my growth, and because I understand how to structure it and how to map it out. And I think anybody that's sort of sensible and thinking rationally, if they're going through some sort of trauma, they might just take the foot off the pedal. I
guess the problem is when you're often not thinking rationally, and that lies the problem, doesn't it?
That was my problem.
And no, I don't want to kind of go down that route because I'm not qualified to talk about kind of how to deal with it. But what I think is, like in hindsight, what were the warning signs for clients?
So we said the other day that I think a lot of my mistakes that I made, the clients made the same mistakes with me, essentially, because I portrayed myself as a competent builder, which is essentially the sentence that I got charged for. I got charged for fraud by false misrepresentation, essentially. So regardless of what happened, I turned up to people's houses saying that, yes, I can fulfill the promises that I'm making, which I'm totally responsible for making those statements. But the same in turn, I was having the same with me. So I was going to see builders at their projects, or I was interviewing builders in the evening and meeting them for a coffee or a beer. I was showing them around the projects that I needed work to be done, emailing them the drawings, and I wasn't doing enough due diligence on them. I wasn't going on company's house, looking at their files, their accounts. I wasn't going to previous projects. I wasn't speaking to completed projects. I wasn't speaking to some of their ex-clients. I was just thinking, let's just get someone booked in and get these projects working.
I think this is a really good example of kind of when you go into business, everyone goes into business with a positive outlook, because if you're not positive about the business, why are you going to go into it? So you're thinking, this is going to be great, and your expectations are possibly going to be, this is probably going to be easier than the reality.
There's a lot of entrepreneur type characters who are over trusting and over positive.
100%.
I'm totally in that mold, and even since with what's happened to me sort of 5 years after, which we can talk about, but it's even showed me again that I was over, even though I'm in an industry now where I'm on top of it, I understand things completely, I'm an expert in that field. I'm still over trusting and over positive.
Of course, and it's and look, going back to the homeowners, like it's easy for me to sit here and say homeowners should do this kind of due diligence on builders, but that's because I'm in the industry and I do it day in, day out. How on earth is a homeowner meant to know what due diligence to do? In the same, and so it's like these things. How often do you do an extension on your house? Maybe once in a lifetime, twice at best.
What I feel so guilty and upset about is the fact that, you know, I create a higher level of trust because I turn up as a, you know, I speak on their level. I turn up. I'm not a builder. I'm not scratching my arse when I turn up to the property. I'm relating to them as somebody that.
No offence to all the builders listening.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, but I led them into a false sense of security, not intentionally, you know, but I did, and because of my natural way with people and the fact that I've spent a lot of time in people's living rooms valuing or talking about their property, it was the same for me. So my day job, going in and talking to somebody, you know, you're doing a house walkthrough, you're talking about their house, you're talking about their plans for the future. I've done that for 20 years. So I was doing that. That was my day job.
And I guess you're probably confident. Like I'm certainly confident about talking about things that I have knowledge of and things like that. Yeah. But then I guess if you're talking about construction, it sounds like you were confident when giving it to him, but it was false confidence.
I think there were layers. My biggest issue was I just didn't know how to budget properly, and I didn't know how to deal with builders when things were going wrong. And those two things, and I've said to a lot of people since, because I mean, when I say since, I mean the last 5 years. I've had that many issues in my property business prior to this or after this. So talk about after, because there's a clear definition of get my act together and get back into my industry since 2018. I've had COVID. I've had business partners screw me over and run off and try and clone my business. I've had staff have mental breakdowns. You know, I've had issues with sales. I've had endless amounts of, you know, property crashes. Liz Truss doing what she. All of these things have happened, but I've always grown month on month my property business around all of these huge external factors because, you know, if you're in an industry that you know how to cope with stresses and trauma and ups and downs, you know, you're fine.
Yeah, and that's what business is you are taking a risk for the potential upside. It's the same as investing. It's you are looking at what the potential upside is versus the potential risks. And people often, when they go in, are always focusing on the potential upsides, but not quite the potential risk, which is obviously the tricky thing.
I mean, biggest regret of my life going down and doing that, and you know, I think I've had to accept for myself that there's a small handful. I mean, I've got hundreds of property clients that I've done a great job for, probably in the thousands. You know, like sort of lots of people that like working with me, but I've got 11, 12, 13 people that just hate my guts and just do not, and I'm never going to change their opinion, obviously.
Of course,
you know,
and you can understand
exactly.
You can understand why. I mean, so run us through what happens then. So obviously you've mentioned like the sentencing and things like that. Tell us, once you had this trading standards interview, when did you start to realise that this is a real problem?
So the interview made me realise how bad some of these jobs ended up, because there were 5 jobs that I sold the contract on to one of the subcontractors who promised that he'd finish them because I knew I wasn't capable of finishing them. So I didn't have full transparency of how those jobs ended because I just assumed that this subcontractor finished them off. Turns out he didn't, which, you know, I started the jobs, I found the subcontract, I'm responsible. Yeah. So I went through this trading standards interview and I left feeling like I'd literally just been pulled back through a hedge. I remember walking onto, it's Tooley Street, isn't it, where trading standards are, and I was just in a blur, thinking, right, you know, this is quite bad. Then it went quiet. It could have possibly been COVID, or I can't remember. Probably just their investigation. It just dipped for 12 months. So I just, as we've talked about, I just knuckled down, built my company, turned the corner, and started saving money for the eventual compensation, and just carried on with my plan A, which is just rebuild myself and compensate. You know, and I am or was going to compensate regardless of being forced to or doing it off my own volition. You know, so that was just the plan for the last 5 years anyway. And then I got a letter through the post. I can't remember. It could have been January 21 or something like that, and it said that they're going to charge me. So they said they're going to turn it into an actual charge. and I need to present to whichever magistrates courts, because it gets heard in the magistrate courts first, and they're charging me with fraud, basically. And obviously that was, the heart was racing. I was thinking, okay, right, this is probably where we will agree at is it isn't fraud, because I didn't do anything on purpose. I didn't steal any money. I didn't,
So the intent wasn't there.
The intent wasn't there. So for myself at that time, I was speaking to family and speaking to even clients, because this has been an open secret with a lot of my clients for the last 5 years. It's not something that's been hidden away. And I thought, well, okay, well let's probably plead not guilty, but offer compensation and offer responsibility, because this isn't.
So you're saying it wasn't fraud because there wasn't intent, but I did mess up.
Yeah.
And these people deserve to be compensated.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my intention, and that was my belief, really.
Yeah.
And then I enlisted a solicitor, and I said, look, I feel like I need some help on this. Can you have a look? And I remember I sat outside my car. I was on the phone to this particular solicitor, and he said, look, it's fraud if someone loses out, not if you gain. Because I said, look, I didn't pocket any money, I didn't steal any money, I didn't make any gains. He said, there's still losses, so this is a fraud case.
Right. So intent didn't really have much to go into.
Intent didn't matter, and we've talked about that before. It doesn't matter that if somebody's building project didn't get finished off and they needed to find 40 grand to finish it. If I stole that money and bought two Bentleys,
well, they've still got the same outcome, haven't they? Yeah.
So the losses on these building jobs went basically in black holes of bad management and incompetency.
Yeah.
I may as well have gone on all these holidays and done this because the same result is the clients lost out.
Yeah.
And the clients lost out the same amount of money, and the same person's responsible.
Well, and the client doesn't care
exactly
what's happened to you; they care about what's happened to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was, we're talking 3-4 years after it had all taken place. But there was a little bit of a acceptance of responsibility at that time, really, and understanding that, okay, this is labelled as fraud, and this is fraud. So therefore, I pleaded guilty to the charge, essentially, and the charge was fraud by false misrepresentation. So it was, that there were minor charges. There were things like not reading the clients their right to reply and things like that on the contracts. If they sign a contract, what have you. But essentially, at that point, I had to accept to myself that I'd committed fraud. Yeah.
Okay. We're just going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors. So, Richard, at what point did you realise, once you'd pleaded guilty to fraud, did you realise you were going to prison?
We haven't revealed that yet on the podcast, but I think most people would know. I think the legal advice that I had. So my barrister, I employed. It was presented to me, a top barrister, essentially to offer compensation. We managed to save up 6 figures. Is that right? 6 figures? Yeah, 6 figures. I'm just trying to think. It didn't save up $1.7 million, isn't it? So, 6. It was 6 figures. So I saved up 6 figures, and I can't be in. I've still got an asset hearing ongoing, as we know about. So I'm not going to be too specific about what's happened with that money at the moment. But I essentially turned up with a substantial amount of money to offer as compensation. That was in my solicitor's client account, and I've said to loads of people since it's all happened, and I've been back out, is that I actually went down to London feeling proud of myself that I had turned my life around. I had 5 years of a successful business, and through that, I'd got myself back on my feet for a couple of years. I'd weathered through COVID, and I'd managed to turn up to court with 6 figures. This wasn't, a Walter Mitty situation. This was in my solicitor's client account, ready to be transferred that day, and there was a plan over full compensation to the full amount of losses. So I went down to London feeling that I knew it would be a charge because I pleaded guilty. So I knew essentially I would be convicted of what they said but we would then avoid a prison sentence, and we would offer compensation, and I would hold my head up high, and it would be a situation that was it could have been prison, but because of my attitude and actions post 2018. But on the day of the sentencing hearing, and this was adjourned several times, so it ended up being on the 23rd of December, 2 days before Christmas. Yeah, which was pretty bad. I went down to court in the morning, and the prosecution presented a case that they wanted to charge me against the value of my quotes rather than the value of the losses. And they did this to get it into the A1 fraud category. So the judge agreed, because it was a charge of fraud by false misrepresentation, every piece of paper that I gave to somebody was the fraud rather than what the actual losses were. So that also meant that compensation was irrelevant at that point. So the fraud value ended up being 660,000 quid, which was the full value of quotes that I'd signed or written at that over that.
But not the losses,
Not the losses. That was quite a sobering moment. The judge said that they're going to recess for lunch, and then after lunch, Mr. Nicholls, you can expect a lengthy prison sentence. So I was allowed 20 minutes in this sort of lobby area of the courtrooms. I rang my family. I rang people that work with me. I rang my accountant. I had obviously you can imagine 20 minutes of just scratching around trying to think, what the hell am I going to do? Because I was never actually told that the worst I was told I was going to get was a 2-year suspended sentence and a compensation order, which I was perfectly happy with. So went back into the courts after the lunch break, and they started at 7 years. Yeah. So they
shot to the gut there. Yeah.
I was inside the little sort of dock area with the glass, and I just can't remember anything. I mean, obviously I've written about it, and I've written on the day and on the evening, and those first few weeks of being in prison were just a total blur. It was like it was happening to someone else. I was stood inside this dark thinking, I was trying to work out what does 7 years actually mean. Obviously I've got young children, I've got a business, I just could not comprehend how it had ended up at that point. Mitigating factors came in, so the fact that there was no theft, there was no sort of I didn't toddle off intentionally to do any of this stuff. So we mitigated down, and the judge ended up at 3 years. So, which I just still, I couldn't hear these things. I didn't hear that I'd been sentenced to 3 years. It was just, it wasn't registering. So.
Were you in shock?
Oh yeah. And so they stopped at 3 years. So I served a year and 3 days in prison, basically. So I was allowed out early on the early release scheme. And I'm going to be on license until 25. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, like we talked about the casualties in terms of customers, but obviously it's had a massive impact on you, your family, your business, like the business that was going well and doing well, and you've got a track record, and for what I know you from. So he really kind of horrible story, really, for everyone. There's no good outcomes here, are there? Or is there? So in terms of the lessons, the positives that we're taking from it.
Yeah, there are a lot. There are a lot, Rod. Yeah, I think first of all, doing things like this today, because as this progresses, the press blew up, and there was sort of quite exaggerated press stories, which kind of amalgamated lots of different things and turned it into quite a strange headline, which was really hard to digest. So, I think I've got a story to tell in terms of, the advice I can give to people, just talking about the red flags that we raise, the experiences that I've gone through. And I think a little bit also on the positive side about the resolve and the mindset, because in my mind,
if you've dealt with this, God, you can keep cracking on with.
My hardest recovery was 2018 when I had cocked up. I haven't cocked up, so I got sentenced in December 22.
And that must have been really difficult for that almost 4 or 5 year gap.
Yeah.
Between going, I've actually turned things around. Yeah. Although I've still got that thing that happened years ago that I've got to pay for.
Yeah, it's quite a motivating factor now. You make a mess, you put it right. I'm 100% responsible and 100% in charge of making the decision to compensate and improve my life again.
So in terms of compensation, obviously no compensation was given because you went there. What's happening now? If there's...
So now it goes. So prior to sentencing, it could have been a compensation order. So we could have made compensation. Post sentencing, it turns into something called POCA, proceeds of crime. So I've got an outstanding proceeds of crime hearing in July, which will determine where the funds go.
Right. Okay.
Essentially. So I'm not in control of that process anymore.
Right. Okay.
But the funds are still there. They're in a frozen bank account. There will be other funds as well. So whatever happens on that POCA hearing is, it's due to be explained.
Okay. But and so, like, going back to some of these lessons, then, I mean, when choosing a contractor, then from the client side, what advice would you give to people that haven't done a larger refurb? I know we don't really get many homeowners listening to this, it's more investors, but let's say we've got investors that are looking to do sort of bigger refurb on a project. What advice would you give to them when choosing a contractor?
Well, I think the things that I didn't do, and a lot of the clients didn't do on me, visiting completed projects. A lot of my clients came to see ongoing projects, and there's always a period of time in a project where it's a happy house, essentially, because I hadn't
at the rip out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the rip out, or
it looks like a big change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think making sure that you go, if the best way to answer this is if I'd done these things. So if I'd gone to visit every contractor that I was going to work with or employ, and I'd visited 2 or 3 of their finished projects, if I'd chatted to some of their happy clients, if I'd followed up on some of their reviews on Rated People, because some of these people, there's one particular guy who caused a lot of trouble for me. He had over 1,000 5 stars on Rated People. Like, where did they come from? Because this guy was an absolute liability. So, following up, don't just take it as read that these reviews are accurate. I think avoid cash payments. A lot of the builders, for me, I was so desperate, or I was trying to avoid the VAT, or I was trying to make things cheaper for myself to get out of holes, that I was happy to and I ended up, every Friday, there was 15, 20 grand's worth of cash going all over the place. And it's
difficult to account then for it.
And there's no, so that's an extremely difficult situation. And a lot of my clients actually offered me cash as well. So this whole kind of lack of due diligence was flowing down all the way through. Again, totally my responsibility, because if I was a responsible, sensible builder, the lack of due diligence on these clients' behalf wouldn't have mattered. So at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. I didn't visit any of these builders' projects. I was happy to entertain cash. I didn't look at company's house. I didn't even look if they had a registered company or if the bank account linked to the company that they were raising invoices for. I didn't, in a lot of cases, I didn't even get itemised broke down quotes.
And then it's a case of kind of the contracts and the payment schedule, isn't it? It's like, what is the payment schedule based on, and what hurdles need to be met in order to do that, and how are we do it? Is it a percentage of the itemised breakdown being done? Let's say, I don't know, 5 grand for tiling and 50%'s been done. Right, let's release 2.5 grand, less any retention, maybe. And it's that sort of thing, which is hard when you're dealing with smaller scale kind of refurbs and developments, because people don't have the the capacity sometimes to do all that.
I didn't have the quality control. So where I went wrong on a lot of jobs was my stage payments, because this is what the Romanian builder did, the guy that was a good builder, that I'd watched how he operated. He took stage payments at certain building control sign-offs. So I carried on that formula. So for argument's sake, it could have been 20% across certain building control sign-offs.
But there could be 80% of the work done.
And the thing is, building control signing something off, has that been done correctly, is very different to, does it look nice? Is it?
Is the standard right?
Is the standard correct? Is it to the client's expectations, and is it to the brief? A building control officer will come around and pass an extension that's been built in the wrong place, as I've found out. So it's very, very risky. But you raise invoices feeling that you're totally vindicated to pay this money to these builders.
Sure.
And there's so much more due diligence that's needed. But I think on any of the projects of that size, some of these projects were, 100 grand plus renovations and extensions. If you're dealing with anything of that size and you're inexperienced, then you could employ someone to act on your behalf, like a QS or somebody that can, a surveyor that can just act between yourself and the builder who's in.
Well, it's the contract administration phase, isn't it? But again, it's easier for investors who are doing this day in, day out. It's harder if you're a homeowner because you're not going to be doing it often, so you don't know the questions to ask. It's like anything that's new, isn't it?
Even as investors. So one of the best things, because I as you know, I've been out 9 or 10 weeks, and I started the process of slightly reconnecting with some of my contacts, and we'll talk about what's happened with my existing client base in a second. But the amount of phone calls I've had and messages on Facebook or LinkedIn from people that are currently developing, they're developers, essentially, they're developers or they're investors engaging regularly with builders, and they've been that close to repeating what I did, or they got away with it with the skin of their teeth because they had a liquid asset somewhere else that they could just plug a hole. And it's so rife, the building industry, with
Well, you've got the most amount of building construction firms going bust on record in the last year. So it's always been a tough market to get in, and a very volatile one as well, with huge amounts of risk. So, so in terms of the HMO side of things, from that happening in 2018, you built up a really great business in terms, and you've clearly got huge capabilities and skill sets in terms of HMOs, understanding that HMO market and the sales market. Is that what you're continuing to do now? Yeah. Fantastic. So tell us about that.
So, and I think that took a lot of soul searching. I was totally lost for the first 3 months of being in prison because I beat myself up twice. So I beat myself up in early 2018. So everything finished in late 2017. I left London, and I knew at that time that I needed to sort my stuff, sort my life out, got shared custody, and I went back into the industry that I'm good at. And I had 5 years building the Property Advantage, which was, a very successful business with hundreds and hundreds of happy clients. So I knew what I needed to do at that rebuild to get compensation, to put things right, and also for personally, for myself, to fulfill what I'm good at. Then 5 years later, you get sentenced. And it's very difficult to not convince yourself that you've cocked up twice, because it felt, when I got sentenced,
because you're being punished for something that happened so long ago. It's not for you're being.
And I'd been through bankruptcy, pain, sort of all these feeling of guilt and not knowing who I was, and the fact, am I any good at, is there a place for me in business? I'd done all that in 2018, and I'd turned my life around, had 5 successful years, and then for the first 3 months of being in prison, I was thinking, well, that's it. I've cocked up twice. Now all of a sudden, the property and the HMO world see me as a cock up, and they're going to attribute everything that's happened to my current business,
which is silly because you've got to go on the capabilities of what you are. Look, I'm not going to get you to build me an extension, but I'll happily let you sell an HMO.
Exactly. And so there was an element of that, but then I think the last 9 months of being in prison, I went into kind of positive, let's just get the best out of a bad situation. I think I gradually started improving my mindset and started, I did have letters from clients, and I did have, I thought I had a small amount of support to come out to. I actually came out, dipped my toe. I said to myself in my diary, I remember writing it, I said, because of, potentially what my headspace would be like when I came out of prison. I had no idea. I thought I'd walk out of prison and just completely start crying and fall on the floor. None of that happened. It's like the biggest anticlimax ever. Just walked out, got picked up by my sister, and went to a coffee shop. It was so weird. But so I wrote in my diary that I'm not going to go onto the social media networking groups. It's 6 months. I'm going to wait. I'm going to just get a job. As you know, Timpson's supported me with a job.
Who are fantastic, by the way, the things that they do. If people don't know what Timpson's does in terms of kind of lots of kind of social kind of good, go and have a look. It's brilliant.
And I want to do as much. The guys at Timpson's, I got to know them fairly well. I know James Timpson a little bit through a family. So he's good friends with my sister, actually. And I do the support they offered, and not just to me because I know him.
Everyone.
Everyone. It's quite incredible. So in terms of a separate sort of doing a few episodes on that. I think that the value that they add is amazing. But so I thought, 6 months working a job, and possibly in the background, I might have 10 clients that support me, and I might be able to do a couple of deals, small little self-employed, and then gradually over a year, 18 months, build myself. Because I'd written the best ever HMO sales business plan in prison. That you never, I mean, how often do you get, discount the first 3 months, but how often do you get 9 months to fine tune a business plan?
Yeah.
And from October, I had the internet because I was in an open prison. I was a low risk, so I was allowed to, I was researching home I was researching.
Fantastic.
So I really, really nailed down this new, the Property Advantage Mark II, if you like, for the market and to go forward. Because I saw it as an opportunity. How often do you get the chance when you grow the Property Advantage? There was so much trial and error, and there were so many lessons that I learned, even though the inertia was it was growth and success. How often do you get to rebuild all of that from scratch and with all the lessons learned plugged straight in?
I mean, whenever I talk about kind of scaling any business, I always talk about prove that the concept is viable. So get some money in and prove that what you're offering actually works, and then scale up. And you're talking about the same thing here, because you've already proven that it's viable with the Property Advantage. And you've proven that by, like you say, make the mistakes, refine it, make it better, get more money in, make the mistakes, make new mistakes, refine that, get it better. And look, you'll continue to make mistakes, refine it, and make it better. But you've already done 5 years worth of it, and that was a successful business.
That's been the biggest eye opener for me. So I came out, I kind of. There's been a few naysayers. There's been a couple of people that, have been a little bit shocked to see me suddenly. What are you doing out? Aren't you a fraudster? This kind of thing. But, and when I say hundreds, I mean hundreds and hundreds of people have messaged me saying, look, let's just essentially, you cocked up, but we know you're a good guy. And my experience of you has been positive.
But also you cocked up on something that's unrelated to what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think if I didn't own it as well.
100%.
I think, I'm totally responsible, and it was a period of my life where I was chaotic, I was irresponsible, without realizing it, and I was complete liability, and I'm not in that period of life anymore, and I've not been for 5+ years, or 6 years now, and I think what I've proved, the biggest lessons that I've learned actually. So going to prison, I've lost shared custody, so my ex has taken my son off me, I've lost all my money. I've lost a lot of confidence. I've had anxiety the first time in my life. I've had all of these things, yet I'm not cocking up and I'm not making mistakes. So go back to 6 years ago when I had potentially personal problems. My ex was taking my son away, all these sort of stuff, and I didn't spot the red flags. I didn't protect myself. Well, I'm actually going through all of that now, and I'm going through probably worse than I was in 2018 now because of the circumstance I'm in. Yet.
But it's because of you've got the capabilities to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. I've got the capabilities to deal with the problems that are being thrown at me. So since coming out, the response from my client base that I've built up, and it was not just the last 5 years. A lot of clients when I was in property sales prior. So there's a big bank of success that I've had in this industry. And I've thought to myself, and a few people have commented. There was one client the other day who I was chatting to that I've sold for before. She's selling with me again. A good client, and she's in a nice network of people as well. A lot of HMOs are in these small little pockets of networks, which you do a good job for 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, word gets out.
So this particular client said that it's a testament to. I think the best thing that I did over those 5 years was I visited every client. I've met everyone that I work with. I didn't try and build a business where I was trying to scale something anonymously and just be, sell properties at the click of a button and not really. I think people really got to know me over those 5 years with the Property Advantage. And I went to so many properties, but I went to meet people face to face. I drove up and down the country constantly every week. And people got a real sense of who I was and how I operated. And that's given me a little bit of cotton wool around this situation where I still think if I'd come out and was pointing fingers and woe is me, I've had this, I've gone to prison, I think the fact that I'm owning it, I'm being responsible, and the victims in this are the people that I let down in London, not me, and I'm prepared to talk about it and I'm not hiding from it. Plus the fact that I've visited these people and they've got to know me over a long period of time. I think that's protected me, and I think that's allowed me to, the business idea that I've got currently is probably 6 to 12 months ahead of schedule.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We're just going to take another quick break for the sponsor. Okay, so in terms of the HMO market, how can sellers get the most out of an HMO that they're hoping to sell?
It always was preparation. I think what I try to do is provide content and education for my potential clients to sort of start thinking about their HMO sale in advance of needing it. That's the biggest thing. I don't like clients coming to me saying they've just had a down val, or they've had a JV split, and all of a sudden there's a panic sale, because when you add speed into a property sale, normally the price goes down. So the biggest advice for HMO sellers is always preparation, understanding what buyers need to purchase an up-and-running HMO. Occupancy details, licensing, lawful development certificates, the correct planning. All of these things. Is it well managed? Chances are a buyer for an up-and-running HMO is going to be a hands-off, out of area, might be based in London or Hong Kong. So it's got to have transferable management, all of these things in place. And I think you can optimize your HMO for sale on an ongoing basis.
By doing that beforehand and making sure that you've got a management team and it's not you managing it on.
Yeah, there's steps in place to make sure that your HMO is always saleable. That's the first thing. And I think they've always been in existence, and that's what I've always said to my clients. I'd rather work with them over. Even now, since I've been out, I've started to pick up stock that I valued 18 months ago, and I've had a year in. It doesn't matter, that year in prison, because now they're ready.
Sure.
So I think that's the overriding advice. But now in this market, I've done so much. I'm sad, as you know. I wake up every day early and I do a blog post of some description, and I'm quite sad about it and analysing it and looking into it. And I think now, 2023, looking at the market there that took place with the lending, I used to sell 20 or 30 HMOs a month sometimes on Rightmove, because the lending before Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, you go off and get a very competitive Shawbrook loan. Most 6-7 bed HMOs, they would work and they would stack for a Joe Bloggs buyer in England with a 25% deposit, and the lending would work.
Yeah.
That doesn't work anymore. If you actually, yesterday I was doing some training with one of these partners that I'm bringing on board, and we broke down a deal, a 6-bed HMO, and then you add in, you look at the lending that it was when this person first bought it, £600 a month, for example, and you actually look at the equivalent lending now, it's £1,800 a month. For the same property, and it kills the cash flow.
Yeah.
Then you add in competition, then you add in the utilities going up and the running costs. So the only way to sell HMOs effectively on that middle bracket, 4, 5s and 6 beds, is sell to cash buyers. There isn't a place for them now at the moment to going out to mortgage buyers. If the landlords themselves can't make it stack on a refinance, because that's why they're selling, because they can't refinance, then what you've got to do as a HMO sales expert is understand where these cash buyers are. And if you remove lending costs from an average 6-bed northern HMO, they stack, and they're a good deal.
Well, I guess it's then looking at, you're always benchmarking to say the risk-free rate, because you're looking at that cost of capital, aren't you? And if cost of capital is 5% and I can go and get that somewhere else, then I don't know, where something might have been trading on a 7% yield before, it's now trading on a 9% yield or something like that. So we had kind of a bit of a trend with kind of people trying to sell HMOs off to funds, and there were some of these kind of smaller funds looking at buying HMOs. Again, call me cynical, but the only people, in my view, that won there were the fund managers taking some fees. Are there still funds out there looking to buy HMOs? And if so, what are they looking for?
So there's smaller funds still looking at supported living, but they're not going into bed. Home REITs I sold hundreds of HMOs via aggregators to Home REIT, and that process, you're right, the the 2 or 3 people in the chain were becoming, instant millionaires overnight on every single transaction. It was shocking. You go on land registry and you see, a HMO that I'd sold for 400 grand. It goes on land registry after 2 back-to-backs. Home REIT take ownership of it, and it's on land registry for 2 million quid just because the lease is in place.
Yeah, crazy.
So that's gone, but there are lots of other funds that are, the student HMOs are very popular with funds. I think kind of almost that student build to rent sort of cluster HMO stuff. They're quite popular. I'm still getting conversations. I'm still getting interest for family offices, high net worths, that kind of thing. They're still very interested in HMOs. But I think on the huge scale, coming into an area and just buying anything and everything, because the uplift with that lease being in place, with the CIC lease, those days have gone. But there's so many active buyers still. But the issue is the vast majority of them are via networking, by building relationships and knowing who they are and actually, same again, meeting them and understanding what they want and then slotting it in that way. It's not the time at the moment to have a Rightmove account and be a HMO specialist, put them on, they just won't sell. I was doing some analysis with a company that they've had 6 HMOs on Rightmove for 12 months and they've had 6 inquiries total.
Well, that just shows it's not priced right.
It shows,
and that's because of probably all the things that you said. And
but it's priced at the level that Shawbrook has said it's worth for this particular person. So, but just the interest rates and the concerns. The VOA's helped, because imagine if you add in the individual banding per property onto all of that. But they're still good buyers for HMOs. We've just got to know how to sell them.
Fantastic. And you are clearly the man for that. Richard, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know it's been difficult subject matter to discuss, and I'm sure all the listeners will really appreciate kind of how candid you've been. So I'm sure some of that stuff is not easy to discuss, and also massive lessons there for everyone to learn from. Thanks once again, and we'll make sure we've got a link to your HMO sales details on the show notes. And for anyone who is interested in HMO sales, Richard is your man to speak to.
Thank you, Rod. Thanks for asking me on. All right, cheers.